I like to make cakes because of my mother. My mother is very good at making cakes. I also like to help my mother make cakes. When I helped my mother always told me tips on making the right cake so that the results were perfect. From there, I became interested in making cakes. Making a cake is not that easy. We have to be patient when making a cake because if we make one wrong step, the cake will fail. In this video, I will give tips on baking cakes. Here are a few baking tips to ensure your cakes emerge from the oven light, fluffy and delicious every time. 1. Prep the ingredients. Have all of the ingredients at room temperature unless the recipe directs otherwise. Eggs should only be left out about 30 minutes before using them. This makes ingredients easier to combine and gives the cake better volume. 2. Use the right flour. If a recipe calls for cake flour and you don't have any on hand, use 1 cup minus 2 tablespoons of all-purpose flour for each cup of cake flour. Some recipes call for a cake flour because it produces a slightly more tender cake, but you'll find all-purpose flour makes a good cake too. 3. Prep your pans. To make sure your cakes don't stick or break apart when you take them out of the pan, grease and flour, or grease and line your cake pans before pouring in the batter. 4. Alternate wet and dry ingredients. Don't dump in all your flour and milk at once. Instead, alternate between adding the two. Just make sure you start with flour because when liquid gets mixed into flour, gluten begins to form. Too much gluten makes for a tough cake, so add a little of one, then the other, starting and finishing with flour. 5. Preheat. Be sure to preheat your oven before baking. Otherwise, your cakes won't rise properly. 6. Release air bubbles. Once the batter is in the pan, tap the cake pan on the countertop to release any large air bubbles in the batter. This is especially important for pound cakes. 7. Test for doneness. In general, when a layer cake is done, it starts to pull away from the sides of the pan. The top is dumped and it springs back when lightly touched. To be sure a cake is done, insert a toothpick near the center. It should come out free of wet batter. 8. Cool down. Allow the cake to cool in a pan on a rack for just 10 minutes. Then, remove the cakes from the pan and cool completely. Make sure your cake is completely cool. Common cake problems. When your cakes consistently turn out less than perfect, it's time for a little detective work. Here are some common problems and the solutions. 1. Coarse texture. It might be that you didn't beat the sugar and shortening, margarine, or butter long enough. For fine, even cake's texture, be sure to beat these ingredients thoroughly. A coarse textures can also be caused by adding too much baking soda or not enough liquid to your butter. Make sure you carefully read your recipe and add the right amount of each. 2. Dense or compact cakes. Although beating the sugar and shortening, margarine, or butter thoroughly is important, it's also important not to overmix. Double check your ingredients. Dense or heavy cakes can also be caused by adding too many eggs or not enough baking powder. 3. Dryness. You might have overbaked the cake. Remember to check doneness after the minimum baking time. Or you might have overbeaten egg whites. Stiffly beaten egg whites should stand in straight bricks, but should look glossy. If the egg whites have a curdle appearance, they were overbeaten. Start again with fresh egg whites instead of folding in the overbeaten ones. Dryness could also be caused by adding too much flour or baking powder, or not enough shortening, butter, or sugar. Double check your recipe to make sure you add the right amount of each ingredient. 4. elongated irregular holes. You may have overmixed the batter when the flour was added. Mix only until the ingredients are just combined. 5. Sticking to the pan. If your cake sticks to the pan as you try to remove it, there are a few different suspects to consider. First, you might not have greased your pan enough. Don't be afraid to be generous with the shortening or butter. You can also try lining the bottom of your pan with waxed paper. It'll come out with your cake when you remove it from the pan. Then, just peel off the waxed paper. Second, you might have removed the cake from the pan too quickly. Be sure to allow your cake to cool for 10 minutes in the pan before you try to take it out. You might have waited too long to remove your cake from the pan. If you wait more than 10 minutes, your cake can become damp and stick to the pan. 6. Sinking in the middle. If your cake sinks in the middle when it should puff up, your pan might be too small for the recipe you're making, or there may have been too much liquid in the batter. This problem can also be caused by opening the oven too often. Resist the urge to take a peek. Your cake also might not have baked long enough, or your oven temperature might be too low. Double check the temperature with an oven thermometer to make sure it's preheating correctly. Okay everyone, those are the tips and solutions for baking cakes. I hope you can successfully bake cakes, especially for beginners. Good luck!